Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dawn of War Unification tier list. It's been a while since we've done one of these, I think. It's been about a year and a half, maybe, something like that. But hey ho, with new updates and new factions comes a new tier list, for obvious reasons. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be going through every single faction and basically putting them next to a letter, because people on YouTube like that for whatever reason. I'm going to do it differently this year. Last year, we had every single faction on one list, and it all got quite hodgepodgey quite quickly. And it was hard to really compare and contrast all the factions in a useful way for seasoned, experienced players, and also more specifically for newer players who are trying to find out what kind of factions they want to play and what kind of niches and metas are in full sway at the moment. So what I've done is that I've basically made a bunch of pages in my wonderful Microsoft Publisher document, mainly because I don't understand how the online versions work, because I am an old man, 32 years of age, I'll have you know, young whippersnapper. I used to have tier lists back in my day, call blimey, just people on Call of Duty shouting at each other in the voice lobbies. But, so I've got, minor diatribe there, I've got each kind of factions, or each style of factions on the go. I've got one page for Space Marines, one page for Imperial Guard factions, Chaos Space Marine factions, general Imperial factions, didn't really know where to put these guys, and Xenos. We put them all in different tiers, and I've got a spare page that I left blank. So any factions, any factions that end up in the S or A tier, I'm going to pop them into a extra sheet, and then we can then find out who is the best of the best when comparing everyone. I think that makes sense. I think that is a valid salad to serve up in the restaurant of Dawn of War today. One thing I want to make extremely clear before we get into the proper meat and potatoes of this video is that everything that you're about to hear in this video is an opinion, right? I have watched about 250 plus videos and casts of Dawn of War Unification, which probably more than one singular man should subject himself to in a lifetime. But, so I've watched a lot of stuff, and I've got certain opinions, and those opinions are going to be massively different from the players of the actual factions that we're going to be talking about. They know all the nitty-gritty inside and outside of stuff, and I know a fair bit, I'd like to think, of all the factions, but from a playing perspective, it's different from a casting perspective, if that makes any sense. And also, if I say anything, and it might make it sound like as if I'm having a go at the developers or the people who do like send things in the mod, that is not what I'm doing at all. The people who make this mod, absolute stallions. They're doing more than I could ever do in a lifetime as a team. And, you know, it's one of the reasons why a lot of people still play Dawn of War these days, because of the new content that's coming out. For total free as well. Like, no, they're not getting paid for it. It's just an amazing stuff that they're doing. So, yeah. And one last thing I want to mention before we start tearing up the factions is that this video is not sponsored. We don't take any sponsorships at the moment, although if War Thunder or anyone like that wants to get involved, what was it, Raid Shadow Legends a couple of years ago, I will happily shell out the moment people start sending me money, but that's not happening as of yet. But there are a few things I want to mention, just so you know how to spot the channel if you so wish. But for some of you that may not know, but I write articles for Age of Miniatures. It's a Warhammer website. We do like loads of tabletop stuff. Let's say, for example, at the moment, I'm working on a article where I'm updating at the moment all the combat patrols in 40k. I basically just take each combat patrol and then I break down all their army rules, enhancements, etc., as well as a little breakdown of each individual unit within said combat patrol. And we are really struggling at the moment. Smaller websites like Age of Miniatures is struggling with the way that, how would one say, Google is doing the AI recommended website kind of thing. Essentially, the way it works out, the bigger your website and the bigger the company that you work for, Google rates it as like being more trustworthy or more viable as a search thingy-majiggy. I don't understand how it works. I just write. Technology is not my friend. So lots of smaller websites like ours are getting absolutely caned in the Google search ratings. So if tabletop is something that you're interested in, please do search for ageofminiatures.com, and we've got a whole bunch. It's not just Warhammer as well. We've also got, you know, things like Age of Sigmar, Old World, Warcry, Kill Team, other games, hobby, you know, just general things like 3D printing, tutorials like how to paint and stuff. We've got basically everything that you could ever want in a nutshell, and that is that. We've also got, well, not we, but me, I've got an Instagram, and at the moment, some of you may be aware that I'm currently working on and writing a tabletop RPG, which is what a lot of these images are relating to. At the moment, everything's done. Not only has the game been more or less finished and play tested, I'm also releasing a card game round about a similar time with it. It's not like Magic the Gathering, it's more like, I don't know, like a 5-player group kind of game, which I'll explain it later on in the future. But essentially, if you want to keep up to date with that kind of stuff, sometime round about Christmas, that's when we're going to start throwing out the Kickstarter stuff. And we're just basically we are waiting for artwork for all those projects and stuff. So if that tickles your pickle for Napoleonic, gas punk, post-apocalyptic role-playing games, that's your alley, then go for that. I also write books as well. Stevie George is my author name. And yeah, I've written like a horror book. I've written a book about penguins surviving a zombie apocalypse. And this book here is a collection of 4 novellas, which if you don't want to buy a full book for £15, you can also look at all these for just a cheeky £5, and they'll get you all sorted and stuff. This book also comes in audiobook format as well. So if you're like me, who don't read very much, but you walk a lot and you listen to a lot of audiobooks, then give this one a go. Look, 5 reviews, 4 stars. That's like not terrible, not amazing, but also not terrible. And last thing, I have a Patreon, and you can sign up for that. £1 a month will get you 1 extra game a week, unless I've been poorly, which doesn't happen often. Does not happen often. But even if you don't want to sign up and pay the money, there's also some free videos on there occasionally. If there was a cast that wouldn't quite work on YouTube, I'll throw on there for free. Maybe there's like a couple of videos on there that I don't think will just work for YouTube for whatever reason. I'll stick on there. So there's some freebies on there. And yeah, like I said, I mean, look at these. We've got Soulstorm games, Unification games, and I tend to do one Soulstorm one week, Unification next week. I would do Ultimate Apocalypse, but there's just not enough games to really parcel out on there, so that's how it goes. So anyway, yeah, let's go on to the tier list. Alright then, so let's start it off with the Space Marine factions. I'll be kicking it off with the OG Vanilla Space Marines. So I think it's no surprise to anyone listening to this that I think that Space Marines are quite in the middle of the road of everything. If you imagine, they are basically just the faction that does a little bit of everything, but nothing too spectacularly well. I mean, let's just take the Tactical Space Marines for an example. They're good, they're tanky, they are able to hold their own against most other kinds of units. Got the heavy bolters for anti-infantry, the plasma pistols for anti-heavy infantry, missile launchers for tanks, all that stuff, and generally that's how kind of most of the Space Marine units kind of go. They're able to take on a lot of different things, and you've also got like the Havocs and the Assault Marines for all that stuff. Their vehicle selection is quite decent. Maybe their artillery is a little bit lacking and a bit weedy. Their late game units with the Land Raiders aren't exactly like, they're not going to be like jumping out the gate and smashing things up. They're just a good, steady, all-round faction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them in the C slot. And the way I'm going to do this tier list is that essentially C is going to be, yeah, you know what, this is a good faction. There's nothing too major wrong with them. They're just all right as they are. And then D is going to be less than that, and obviously B is going to be more than that. So that's my brain. That's how my brain is going to be ticking over with this kind of thing. So with the Salamanders, I would say that in the great big Venn diagram that is all these factions, there's a lot of overlap with the vanilla Space Marines and the Salamanders, in the sense that, I mean, they're infantry, you can still get the certain upgrades for all that stuff, but they've got like a fair few different kinds of ways of going about things. So they've got a lot of focus on flame weapons, which are obviously because they are Salamanders, and being able to break the morale of enemies is really, really useful, because 9 times out of 10, an enemy with broken morale does a lot less damage. So, and with that added on the fact that they are a little bit slower, but they're also a lot more tanky and do a lot more damage. In a long, prolonged firefight, Salamanders are really, really useful in just standing there, taking a load of damage, while being able to slowly but surely whittle down their opponents. I don't think they've got really anything huge in their roster. I mean, they've got Vulcan, so they've got Primarch on their side. They've got a nice selection of late game Land Raiders and stuff. Again, their artillery isn't that amazing to shout home about, but a lot of their infantry, really, really amazing, and I think that they're probably a lot more of a infantry-focused kind of faction, in my honest humble opinion, anyway. So yeah, so with all that being said, I think I'm going to put the Salamanders in Tier B. I do believe that the similarities between the two factions are, there's lots of them, but the Salamanders having better heavy infantry, even though they're a little bit slower, you can kind of circumvent that with Razorbacks and Rhinos and stuff. They've got better morale breaking. They've got Primarchs and a lot more options in the later tiers and stuff. So yeah, I think I'm going to stick them there. So with the Imperial Fists, I don't think there's much need for a discussion here. I think that they're very clear S tier. When it comes to comparing them to the vanilla Space Marines, they're a lot further away from the standard Space Marine faction compared to the Salamanders. I mean, when they're opening, their capping unit is the Siege Marines, which are able to physically carry around heavy cover with them, which I can't underestimate. I mean, you just can't underestimate how strong that is, especially in the firefights. It means that they're still viable in the late game. So for a lot of other factions, like, again, Space Marines, got the Scouts, and even if they've got sniper rifles, roundabouts tier 3s, tier 4s, you don't really see that many snipers knocking around. However, with the Siege Marines, just having one of those units inside a blob of your heavy infantry, it's really, really useful. I mean, I can't remember how much heavy cover reduces range damage by. It's something like, what's that, 25%, 30%? It's quite a sizable amount and quite a sizable chunk of incoming damage that has been reduced there. But not only that, but when their morale breaks, they just basically fight harder. I think they're significantly slower, but they're just going to stand there and basically kick the crap out of people even more than they originally were. So when you think if there's like a long period of fighting going on, and maybe someone's got some flamers on you go, or maybe there's like artillery there, and normally that would force an opponent to retreat. When the morale breaks, they kind of go backwards. But no. With the Imperial Fists, their morale breaks and they think, right, okay, now is the time to actually push. So having long-term firefights with Imperial Fists isn't exactly what you want, really, which is, not what many factions really want to do. They want to be, if they're having the advantage, they want to then continuously push on their advantage, but that might not be the case when you're going up against Imperial Fists. And when they get to tier 2, the Razorbacks are just the most fantastic vehicle to get in the second tier. They've got plasma pistols and las cannons, so they can come out and basically deal with any kind of threat on the go, as well as being able to travel, or should I say transport, one unit around as well, so you can always pop a cheeky little Tech Marine in there and keep it repaired and stuff. Tech Marines as well, they're a builder unit, but they can also, they've got plasma pistols, bolt pistol combi kind of wombo combo, they've got flamers on the go as well, they've got commander armor, so they can also, in the early game, if you want to push and do maybe like a little bit of a rush, you can send 2 Tech Marines and a squad of Imperial Fists forward. They can also swap out, the Imperial Fists Tactical Marines, they can swap out all their weapons and everyone be equipped with a missile launcher for a short while, which is an expensive ability, but that's really good. So if you're behind in a tech tier, and maybe your opponent's got some vehicles out on the go before you're even able to counter them, well, don't worry, because you can now just have this one unit be massively anti-vehicle for about 10 seconds, which is stupidly good. They can also get Rogel Dawn. They can also have their Glaive tank, which is just stupidly good. So yeah, I don't think there's much debate in there. I think Imperial Fists are very clearly a S tier faction. And what makes them even more impressive is that, it's kind of a similar story for most of the Space Marine factions as well, but they're quite easy to play as well. There's no massive micro required. There's no weird game mechanics going on with them. The only weird thing about the Imperial Fists is that rather than building up multiple plasma generators, they build up one plasma generator that then upgrades over time. So that's something. It does make them a little bit vulnerable, I guess, to some base harassment. Someone comes in and destroys a quadruple upgraded plasma generator, that will then cause them some issues. But from the games I've seen, you don't really see that, mainly because the Imperial Fists are kind of just standing in your face. It's hard to really do some base harassment when you've got the banana boys just standing outside your base, causing all sorts of issues. So there we go. So the Legion of the Damned. Now, this is a tricksy one. I don't see many games with the Legion of the Damned. So this might be a bit of a biased opinion, but I don't think they're amazing, to be honest. When you think about it, so every time I've seen the Legion of the Damned being played, they open up with 2 or 3 attack bikes, Attica Centurus, which is their tier 1 commander, and then they go into tier 2. For those guys taking up, it takes a redonkulously long time. In fact, actually building anything from the portal takes quite a long time. So if they're maybe a bit careless for their bikes, then that's them shut down for quite some time. But even their infantry as well. So when the infantry for the Legion of the Damned break, they have their health gets reduced quite a lot, and it takes them a long time to regain their morale. So if you just get a couple of flamers on some boys, that counters even the attack bikes, even though they are technically vehicles. Well, they're not technically vehicles. They've got infantry armor or is it heavy infantry armor, or is it demon armor? Something like that. Either way, they're not classed as vehicle armor, if memory serves me well. So anyone can kind of just deal with them with flamers. And tier 1 flamers are, I mean, I think most factions have access to those guys, with the exception of a fair few Xenos factions. But it makes them very hard to get going in the early game. And then even in the, I mean, okay, when you get to like the late game, you know, they bring out the Terminators, they bring out the Predators, and they're all pretty good. But you're still always kind of like got to be really, really careful on how you deploy your units, on their positioning, making sure that people don't, you know, get lost and stuff. So I'd say that Legion of the Damned are probably just a little bit worse off than the Space Marines. I've seen some people do remarkable things with Legion of the Damned in team games. In the 1v1s kind of stuff, I've only really seen Legion of the Damned pop off when the players, maybe it was like a lower level game, when, you know, people don't quite know how to shut down Legion of the Damned quite quickly enough. But I think, like, if I ever saw, I mean, it's probably the reason why I never see these guys being picked in the tournaments, really. Because if you're going up against someone who knows how to deal with you, they're going to deal with you very quickly. And there's nothing much you can really do with them. So, yeah, Legion of the Damned, you could go there. And Space Wolves, kind of a similar story, I think. In team games, I've seen them do really, really good stuff. I haven't really seen them in any 1v1, actually. But I can probably see why. The way that they do their strategic points, I mean, it's massive buff compared to what they used to be. I mean, I remember last tier list, they were on the bottom of everything. Maybe were they a bit behind the Adeptus Mechanicus Explorators? Maybe they were just a little bit in forward. Can't quite remember, but they are, you know, I like Space Wolves. I want more Space Wolves games. I think they're a really interesting faction. The idea that your economy is basically based on your halls of knowledge, your strategic points. They're not your main source of income, and you basically get technology by either scrapping your own buildings or being a bit of a cheeky blighter and going up to your opponent's base and stealing his bits and bobs. Really interesting, really fantastic premise for a faction, and I think there could be a lot be done with them. But I don't know if in a 1v1 scenario they're going to be all that viable. But in team games, I think they're entirely viable. So I'm going to put them just a little bit ahead of the Legion of the Damned. Yeah, like I said, I think there's a reason why you don't see many 1v1s with these guys. You don't see the people who play a lot and in the tournaments ever pick these guys for the factions that they'll use for reasons. Moving on to the Black Templar. Now, these guys are a bit of a mystery for me. On paper, I think that they're quite good. I think, like, logically, right, you've got your Black Templar who come out with their Crusader squads, being supported by the Crusader Fire Support squads, working in tandem, they should be able to beat the crap out of everyone. And nearly every game that I've seen of them, in the first 5 minutes or so, they do absolutely phenomenally. And maybe this is because it's a bias of the formatting of the channel. You know, like, I almost exclusively really cast games that go in for 20 minutes or longer. So for those kinds of games, the Black Templar are naturally going to be disadvantaged. The earlier they can do damage, the quicker they can win, the more likely they are to win, because they are primarily a tier 1... Well, they're not a tier 1 faction, but a lot of their advantages of being able just to run forward and bash people over the head with really strong tier 1 units. That is the Black Templar. And on the channel, that's probably why we don't see them win all that often. But, yeah, and another thing that I suppose maybe does them a bit of a disservice is their rage ability, where they go into battle, one of their models dies, and there's a chance that you basically lose control over them for a little bit. You do a lot more damage, from what I understand, but you lose control over them. And in the back and forth nature of a fight, especially in a 1v1, imagine a scenario where you go into someone's base, maybe you get a squad wipe, maybe you take out a listing post, you've done your damage, the opponent is now rallying to push you out, so then you pull out, and then you've done the damage, but you've not lost that much. With the Black Templar, more often than not, you'll go in, you'll bash some stuff about, think, right, okay, now it's time to pull out, and then maybe a couple of your units decide, you know what, no, we're not going to run away. We're going to stand and fight and bash things over the head, and you can't make us run away no matter what. Which isn't ideal. It's not ideal at all. It's not really good. And I don't think that, you know, I mean, the Salamanders, the Imperial Fists, they've got a good choice of Razorbacks in the later stages of the game. I don't think that the Black Templar have got the best kind. I mean, they're not bad. They're not bad at all, but like, it doesn't exactly put them in the forefront of my mind when it comes to top-tier factions for the Space Marines. So I'm going to put these guys just behind the regular Space Marines. I still think they're quite good. And again, like I say, I know that I'm probably being biased against them because I only ever see them in longer games, which is not really where they shine. But for those reasons, that's why I'm going to put them there. The Blood Angels. These guys had quite the rework from the previous patch. And I think in the games that I've seen with them, they're doing all right, actually. They're not absolutely stomping all the games that I've seen them in, but they're certainly holding their own. I mean, what is it? You've got the options of either going for the Wings of Sanguinius or the Might of Sanguinius, so it's either lots of maneuverability options or more punchy options. Their rage ability doesn't necessarily mean that you lose control of them as unreliably as the Black Templar do. I don't think as well, like, the loss of control lasts for as long, but again, I could be wrong in that. But these guys, almost like the inverse of the Black Templar, they start off, I would say, a little bit weaker. From what I've seen, they don't really do all that much impacting in the early stages of the game. Yeah, they're a little bit of harassment with their assault marines here and there, but they don't exactly roll over people. But in the late game, when they start getting on their predators, which I must say that they've probably got the best predators out of all the dudes and dudettes here, they've certainly got something really special there. And, you know, they've got the Black Company, is it? With the people who've lost their minds to the Red First or whatever. And they're all really, really good. And one thing I've not actually mentioned so far is the Primaris. I know that the Salamanders, the Imperial Fists, they've got access to a good chunk of Primaris people, which are, you know, whatever you think about the lore reasons for, you know, stuff. I'm not here to comment on the lore. I have my opinions, and I'm going to keep them stum. I'm not going to say anything, because that's not what we're here for. But yeah, the Primaris options for the Blood Angels are quite good. You know, you can get Primaris Assault Marines, which do a heck of a lot of damage. You've also got Primaris Eradicators, something like that. I can't remember for the life of me what they're called, but they're pretty good. So early game, they're a little bit, you know, bit of a wet flannel, but later on in the game, they are actually quite remarkable. But because of that inconsistency, I'm going to put them a little bit behind the Salamanders. Just because, I mean, the Salamanders, they're good all the way through. But with the Blood Angels, if you're able to survive that initial problem in the early stages of the game, you're in for quite a treat, I must say. Now, the Raven Guard, let's have a think about these guys. So these guys have got, like, interesting stealth mechanics, yeah? Basically, most of their units can go infiltrated, and the longer the game goes on, the more upgrades you get for them, the longer they could be stayed infiltrated for. I don't know if infiltration is a strong game mechanic. Now, in the early game, infiltrated units are really, really useful, especially against factions like Orcs that struggle with infiltration detection. But as games go on, it's harder to make infiltration units work, unless, of course, maybe there's a big battle going on down here, and you're doing some harassment nonsense over yonder, and maybe you're splitting the enemy's attention, or maybe trying to do something without them realizing. But generally, infiltrated units don't make as much of a huge impact in long games as most people tend to think. And with the Raven Guard as well, I remember, what is it there? Moya, Dahaya, something. They've got a Space Marine unit, which is a really cool Space Marine unit, but it's like a Primaris sniper Space Marine thing that can go invisible and snipe people out. Which, again, I don't think snipers are all that useful as the game progresses. I mean, still, like, you know, you go up against factions like the Imperial Guard and other people that have got, you know, infantry all the way through. Good against them, but yeah, generally, most games aren't decided by who has infiltrated units or who has snipering kind of units. But they do have quite a lot of maneuverability. They've got quite a good range of relic units. I do believe that they've got some sort of Thunderhawky kind of thing, which is, I mean, any kind of relic unit that can also fly is pretty useful. A lot of features about relic units is that they're quite slow and cumbersome, but having a fast one that's able to go around, blast things apart, and then run away for repairs, that's always good. So I'm going to move these guys on the C list, if I can select them. Hold on. I'm an old man, leave me alone. So yeah, I'll stick you guys on the top of the C ranking for those reasons prior mentioned. Dark Angels, good old stable of the Space Marine factions. I think these guys have been around for where they're one of the first factions for Unification. I could be wrong. I mean, I started playing Unification in, what was it, patch towards the end of the 5th patch, maybe? Time goes by. You know, time's a valuable thing, as not Limp Bizkit. Who was the other band? Linkin Park, that's what they said. I know my bands. But yeah, they've got quite strong scouts, which makes them strong in the early game. They have access to good other units like Mortis Dreadnoughts, which are like Hellfire Dreadnoughts, but super duper good. They can then later on in the game swap out for lots of Terminator stuff, so they can convert all their commanders into Terminators, and loads of other units as well. Or they can put everything on motorbikes, which are also remarkable. So got a bit of flexibility in their ranks as well. I don't think that. I mean, I've seen a fair few Dark Angels games, and they have done really well, but I don't know if they are better than Salamanders. Can't quite put my finger on it. If they are not better than Salamanders, they are akin to them. Because I would say for the majority of the game, before they get that branching tech path of either the motorbikes or the Terminators, they work very similar to how the vanilla Space Marines would work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the Blood Angels just a little bit to the side. I'm going to stick the Dark Angels smack bang there, and I think that makes sense to me. Yeah. Would I change anything else? No, I think this is quite a fair and balanced way of doing things. We've got the Imperial Fist way ahead and shoulders above everyone else. And then, because a lot of Space Marine factions, because again, that big Venn diagram, they're all quite similar. They're all niched together in a general kind of power split. There's no major differences between them all. So that's the Space Marines for you. Alright, so moving swiftly on to the Imperial Guard. Now, I think this is quite an easy one to say for the OG Imperial Guard. They are just straight up S tier. Now, think of it this way, right? So, the Imperial Guard, tier 1, right? You've got your infantry command somewhere. You might have popped down a cheeky turret for an aggressive reason. You've got your command squad coming out, and they've got a priest and a psyker, or a commissar, depending on certain kind of things. That is a strong opening, because you can have aggressive options in bashing people's buildings, and you've also got defensive options in being able to hide inside your listing posts. So it's quite secure in tier 1. Unless somebody does like a really serious rush on you, you're going to be quite alright no matter what. Tier 2 comes out. You've got the Chimeras to be able to keep your infantry safe. Make sure that they're responding to threats all across the map. You have got your Sentinels for some quick mobile anti-armor, and you can also put some autocannons on them so you can make them anti-vehicle / anti-heavy infantry if you really want to. Later on, you've got your Cascans and your Ogrins, which do really well. Stick a priest in them. You can basically make them immortal, which is a donkerously strong ability. And the Lehman Russes, and all the variants you can get for them, as well as the Titans, and the aircraft and all that stuff. I suppose that's one thing that I forgot to mention with the Space Marines, that the... who was I thinking of here? The Raven Guard, the Dark Angels, all these guys, they got really strong aircraft, which makes them, quite decent. The Imperial Guard, they've got a lot of aircraft options, which makes them pretty damn strong. The Vendettas and the heavy gunships are just stupidly good, especially against factions that maybe are more close combat orientated, because obviously close combat people, they can swift their chain swords as much as they want up in the air, and you won't be able to get them. You won't be able to get them because you're not that tall, young man. And Steel Legion, they're a funny one. They're a funny old faction. Originally, it used to be the case of you would either go Mechanized Infantry or Armored Fist. Mechanized Infantry being the infantry path, obviously, and then the Armored Fist being the tank path. And the tank path would basically mean that you get Sentinels, tier 1, and all that stuff. And it was, from the get-go, a really strong difference between those two build paths. Now it's more like, they're quite similar, except that as the game goes on, you rely more on either infantry with tank supporting, or more on tanks with infantry supporting. And they've got some really good options for them. I mean, when they're in tier 1, it's kind of similar. I mean, they've got the Pioneers, which are able to not only cap, but they can also build. So that means if you want to maybe do a quick tier 2, you are then able to basically not buy so many capping units. Leaves you a little bit vulnerable, but it's something that you could do, and it's certainly something that I've seen on the channel before. Or you can, build up your relay station. You don't even need to build your tier 1 recruitment building, and give you guys grenade launchers. And the grenade launchers for the Steel Legion are just incredibly good. But then they're not as defensively as viable as the Imperial Guard. Well, I mean, like I mentioned with those guys, they could drop down an infantry command, throw a bunch of boys inside there, or even just their field command, and, they'll be having a grand old time. Steel Legion don't have that option. You know, they don't really have many buildings apart from the listing post that they can jump inside. I mean, their transit turrets are amazing. You know, I think they've got one of the strongest turrets in the game, but I don't think they're nearly as defensively viable as the Imperial Guard. But when they get into that late game, you've got Commissar Eric, you can sometimes stick him in a bloody tank of all things, and they can also drop down some bloody Bane Blades. So rather than, you know, you've got your Mars Pattern Command on one side of the map, he spawns, he then makes a slow, rumbling way down there. You can just basically, I don't know, maybe sneak some people around the side and then drop a Bane Blade inside the enemy base, which is really, really strong. But I think for the lack of defensive reasons and stuff like that, I think they are still really, really strong. But are they stronger than... No, we're not going to compare them to other factions just yet, because that'll be too confusing. Let's just compare them to other Imperial Guard factions. If we're just basically doing that, comparing to the Imperial Guard, I would say they're a little bit worse than the OG Guardsmen. Not by much, mind you. I don't think by much. I think that generally, again, in the Venn diagram of factions, they are very, very similar. I just think that lack of defensive capacity in the early game does let them down a little bit, but not by much at all. So Deathcore Krieg is an interesting one. I don't know whether they are the same level as the Imperial Guard or a little bit more. Now, my reasons for this is, right, so think about their tier 1, right? They've got their turret that they can... Not turret, sorry. Their bunker that they can throw down. And that is pretty decent, isn't it? I mean, not many factions can deal with the bunker if you put someone in there in the opening stages of the game. So you can be aggressive with them. Maybe there's like a relic that you want to deny for a little while. Stick a bunker down. Totally fine with that. And also the commander as well. The commander is able to get the ranged bodyguard units, which have access to plasma guns, tier 1, which doesn't sound like much, but it's a relatively cheap way of dealing with heavy infantry, which, say for example, the Imperial Guard don't necessarily have that. Yeah, they can get the plasma guns if you stick them inside of their buildings and stuff, but mobile plasma guns don't really have that until later on. They do struggle with the same thing that the... Who were they? The Black Templar do, which is if their units have their morale broken, then they basically stay in combat for a while. But you don't really see that too often, to be honest. I haven't seen that too much, and that could be easily remedied by throwing down a Commissar in there and stuff. And generally, like their infantry is going to die anyway. That's just the standard thing for Imperial Guard, really, isn't it? And then they get into tier 2, and then they've got the Storm Chimeras, they've got their other units. Although we don't really see that. I suppose the heavy weapons platoons have had quite the nerf, and that... Because you can't... I don't think you can put them in Chimeras anymore, which massively reduces their maneuverability. They are a lot more vulnerable than the Imperial Guard's heavy weapons teams, because, you know, they hunker down, and they've got a bit more chunky health. But then again, there are multiple men in the unit, so if you lose one, then you're able to reinforce them. So that's something that I suppose they're kind of equal in that regard then. Late game, they've got their Ragnaroks. Don't think they've got as much flexibility in their late game tanks, because obviously the Imperial Guard, they can have like a whole bunch of different add-ons to their Lehman Russes. And the Deathcore Krieg certainly do have flexibility in the late game tanks, especially there with the Zeppelins and all that stuff. It's a tricky one. I would say that I'm going to put them on par with the Imperial Guard. They basically do the same thing, but they do it differently, if that makes any sense at all. I don't think either one of them overlap each other. I think they're just doing all right as it is. So now for the Praetorian Guard. Now, obviously I'm biased towards this faction, mainly because they're British, or they're a British-focused, aesthetically kind of faction. And, you know, me being from the best part of East Yorkshire, in the United Kingdom of Northern Ireland, Great Britain, and Gibraltar, I've got bias towards them. But it breaks my heart to really talk about them, because I think they're good. I think they're quite firmly in the C department. So hear me out, right? So they open up, and basically at this point now, I think we've all come to kind of the conclusion that you open up with the Blood Axe mercenary camp, mainly because in the early stages of the game, the regular section is a little bit pants. They have to stay stationary for a little bit to fire, even though the fire does a lot more damage. The opening hero, or the opening commander, is a little bit wet around the ears. Well, I mean, he comes out and he's able to cast Guide on people, so their accuracy increases, and he's also able to basically give them a temporary fleet of foot, which, comparing them to the Imperial Guard leader, so the company commander, for both these factions, actually. The Death Guard and the Imperial Guard. Nowhere near as useful as that. And, I mean, even the Steel Legion, I know his commander isn't exactly amazing neither, but he's still able to, put up a decent fight against maybe other non-combatant, maybe a more supporting enemy commanders. He's able to hit them hard with his sword, but the commander for these dudes aren't that great. They do have access to a lot of decent supporting heroes later on with the standard bearer, the trumpeter, and the snipery dude kind of person, but nothing really remarkable there. They're also lacking in the defensive capacity, which is, common for a lot of Imperial Guard factions. They can't occupy the buildings necessarily, apart from their listing posts. The listing posts, their main thing is that when you upgrade them, they drop that down a big bombardment, which is really easy to miss with. And, you can get the auto bunker, which, if you go for the auto bunker, that's a really strong opening. You've got the Blood Axe Mercs, give them big shooters, get some irregulars with grenade launchers, happy as Larry, you're raring to go. But then again, in saying that, the Blood Axe, it's quite an expensive opening because you've got to buy the recruitment building, then the research building. Blood Axe Mercs are quite slow, so it's easy to get them out of position sometimes. And while they're pressing over to do some maybe harassment or maybe to do some defensive stuff, the irregulars are still capping at that point, usually, from what I've seen on these games. So not the most amazing opening kind of thing, but their late game is remarkable. When those Leman Russes come out, I've seen that, the one Leman Russ Vanquisher or Executioner tank basically take on 2 or 3 tanks on its own, unsupported. And when it is supported, it does remarkable stuff. And the Stormhammers, when they come out as well, they are stupidly good. Again, each of their tanks on their own, vastly, I would say, dare I say, the Leman Russes for the Praetorian Guard are the best in all the Imperial Guard factions. It's just physically getting to that stage, which is a bit of a problem for them. And comparing their elite units, like their... Because they've got no access to Ogrins, have they? No. And also their building unit, like, the conscripts that come out. If they lose their leader, it's not a major problem, it's quite cheap to reinforce them. But if they lose a leader, then the morale breaks and the convicts point blank refuse to work. Which, good on them. Don't work for the government. Never. I respect their life choices in the mainstay of things. But, like say, for example, you've got the Death Corps Krieg, and they've got a unit of pioneers and they're building stuff. And, the 3 models in there, 2 of them die, but 1 of them is still building. Whereas for the Praetorian Guard, if 1 specific model dies, then they all stop building, which, delays things. So if you're trying to do like a really clutch repair job on something, or maybe you've got to really quickly build something up and it's just maybe ever so slightly so close to being finished, there's a chance of that not happening, which is a real pain in the backside, even if you've got a full squad of actual builders, but you're missing your enforcer. So that's a bit of a pain. So yeah, it breaks my heart that they're going to see. They're not bad at all. But in the comparison to all these guys, I think that's where they're probably going to sit. Now, the Renegade Guard, these guys are interesting because they're basically 2 factions in one. You've got the Vrexian Revolutionary Guard, and then you've got the Shogun people. And for the Vrexian Guard, I'm mainly going to be talking about the Vrexian Guard because I've seen more of them in 1v1s. I haven't seen that many Shogun games in the 1v1s. They're mainly, you see them quite often in group games and such. But Vrexian Guard, now, they are quite strong. What, their Revolutionary Guard in Tier 2, they're all able to get missile launchers for remarkably cheap stuff. The Company Commander, or the Order Ministorum dude or whatever, much like the Death Corps Krieg Commander, he is able to get early access to plasma guns, which is quite good. The buildings, they're able to occupy them, and if you occupy them with, I think it's like, 4 or more? I think, rather than the normal 3 that you can fit in an infantry command, you can fit 4 or 5 or something like that. And then they're able to fire missile launchers out. So if you're behind in tech and you're being assaulted by other vehicles and stuff, well, you've got missile launchers, which is quite good. But even then, you've still got quite decent access to anti-vehicle stuff. And also the heavy weapons team. So every one of these guys have got like slightly different ways of doing their anti-vehicle stuff. Praetorian Guard, they come out and they've got the Gatling team, they've got the Mortar team, they've got the anti-vehicle team, you've got the Imperial Guard, which has the people that hunker down, and you can upgrade them as they go. Death Corps Krieg, they move around as a little platoon, and then you can upgrade them with other bits and bobs. These guys do a bit of both. You know, they can move around and upgrade with different models in the unit, and they can also hunker down. So it's the best of both worlds, really. So these guys have probably got the best heavy weapons teams on the go. The vehicles later on are quite good, especially from what we've seen from the basilisks when they throw down a big old boom, and they've got the Nurgle upgrade. It has been nerfed now for patch 7.2, I think. So rather than doing like, damage for like everyone in the unit, I think it's like a little bit less, or maybe the length of time that people are poisoned are a little bit lower, but it's still good all the way through. And the late game, it's very on par with the Imperial Guard and Deathcore Krieg. They, got good vehicle selection, got good Titan selection as well, well, relic unit selection anyway. And yeah, and they scale really well into that late game. And the Shogunate, more close combat orientated individuals. Hard to say, really. I've tried to read the tooltips, and it's like reading a book, and I have no attention span for them. And so maybe that's my bias, but it doesn't really matter anyway. They do anime things, and that is the main thing. So I am going to stick these guys, actually, if I can move these guys just a little bit over on this side, I'm going to stick them in front of the Imperial Guard. They basically do everything that the Imperial Guard do, but I think they do it a little bit better. Oh, and the Ogrins as well, my goodness, with the blades for hands and the beastmen and stuff. So they've also got a fair few close combat orientated things for them on the go as well. So last but not least is the Vestoyan Firstborn. There's a fair few things to say about these guys, I suppose. They open up with the Hunters as their capping unit, which is quite strong, because they've all got sniper rifles. Bit of a low unit count. I mean, when you compare them to the irregulars of the Praetorians, conscripts, or just regular guardsmen for the Imperial Guard, the Jaegers for the Deathcore Krieg, those units have got a lot of stuff going on for them. They're able to maybe take part in a bit of a firefight, and if you lose a couple of models, not the end of the world. But for the Vestoyan Firstborn, when those hunters are, they can skirmish, right? They can do a bit of skirmishing, but with their sniper rifles, if they come across, say, an enemy commander, they're a little bit shafted because sniper rifles don't work very well against commanders. They can't really do much in the way of, how would one say, holding off like against big pushes, like maybe if there's like an early tier rush something going on, then not exactly going to be standing fighting on the... I mean, they'll be on the front lines, obviously, because that's the only thing that they could do at that point. But they aren't going to be winning any kind of major engagements. But they can do things like snipe out builders, do some decapping nonsense. So it's all right for them. I think their opening commander, kind of similar to the Praetorian Guard, although their commander is a lot better than the Praetorian Guard commander, because he's quite good in close combat, quite good in ranged. He's able to be upgraded with lots of really useful abilities, like bringing down big gas bombs and all that stuff, quite useful as the game goes on. But it doesn't have access to like a retinue. He's not like the the Death Corps or the Traitor Guard, where they're able to have their commander and then have some like bodyguard units to add to his DPS. But that does mean that he is able to join other groups, so that's not too bad. Late stages of the game, the Praetorian Guard have really good access to really strong tech, like say for example their Tesla coil being their super duper turret, which has like a remarkably long range, does a lot of damage. They have their Gunlugger Ogrins, which are like a ranged version of Ogrins, which is quite interesting to see. And their infantry is really, really good. But the problem is that, so like I said, their infantry is quite good. But then like if they've got more infantry than they do vehicles, then they're out of harmony, which is their unique faction ability, I guess. So you're kind of encouraged to go a lot more mechanical than you are man kind of thing, which is fine because I mean they've got like really good strong vehicles and stuff, and again they've got quite remarkable aircraft as well. I mean, what are they called? I completely forget what the aircraft for the Vestoyan Firstborn are called, but they're quite good. But if you're going up against a composition that is strong with the anti-vehicle stuff, maybe your opponent's gone for a lot of missile launchers, then the Vestoyans won't be able to benefit from their, affinity and all that stuff. So, yeah, bit of an odd one. Although, in saying that, I also haven't seen that many games for the Vestoyans in comparison to maybe some of the others. So, I'm going to put them just above the Praetorian Guard, a little bit below the Steel Legion. I think that's a fair way to divvy it up. So, quite, some strong contenders in the S rankings. But unlike the Space Marines who are kind of like all blobbed together in this okay kind of range, with the Imperial Fist being way above everyone else. Imperial Guard, there's a lot more spread. There's a lot more spread in their power rankings, I think. So moving swiftly on to the Chaos Space Marines, we'll start with the vanilla variant of them. And comparing them to their Loyalist counterparts, I think that they are remarkably much stronger. When you think about it, they've got a lot of openings for them. And yeah, okay, you know, they're quite similar to the vanilla Space Marines. They've got lots of overlap. But it's as the game goes on, as the game progresses, they've got a lot more options. So let's say, for example, we take a popular opening of the Chaos Space Marines. You've got your cultist opening, into grenade launchers, beat people up with that. Maybe got your Chaos Lord out there doing some nonsense as well. Then you get into tier 2, then you've got Defilers, maybe got your Hell Talons, and then eventually you either get your Horrors out to bash buildings or any vehicles that come out, or maybe go Possessed Marines, Predators, and Obliterators. And with Unification as well, they've also got access to the things like Vindicators, which, you know, I mean, we've seen them on the channel before. They come in, they throw down a bomb, the unit is dead. Even with the nerf that they got in the recent update, they're still pretty darn good. So I'm going to stick the Chaos Space Marines up here into A. Not quite S tier, I don't think. Not exactly going to be rolling over people in any kind of regard, but in comparison to other things like that, I think they've basically got an answer for everything, yeah? And especially when they get into the very late game, they've got the Titans on the go. They've also got access to their Demon Princes and their Bloodthirster. They've also got... Is Adorn someone, that sorcerer person that can then summon a extra Bloodthirster? It's only temporary. It's not like a, you know, like a long-lasting summon, but I mean, you could have 2 Bloodthirsters on the go at any one given time, which is, you know, that's quite scary from the perspective of an opponent. Speaking of having answers to most things, or nearly everything, the Thousand Suns, they are pretty good. Whenever you see a Thousand Suns player who knows what they're doing, you're going to be shaking your boots a bit, because these guys have got much flexibility, not in their openings as well, but also their late game stuff. I mean, the Sorcerer Lord, in on his own, is the MVP of their Tier 1 and Tier 2. He comes out, he's got a bunch of different spells to choose from, and if you know what kind of spell book you're looking for a specific kind of opponent, you can absolutely nail them every single time. The Screamers that could jump around and do some nonsense. You can transition as well into Tier 2 and get some more demons in the form of Pink Horrors, the Flamers, the Herald of Zinch, and, you know, if you don't go for that, then go for the Infantry instead, and then you go for the Thousand Suns, add an Aspiring Sorcerer onto them. They've just got more Doom Bolts as well, so, like, if your micro is on point, and you know what you're doing with them, Thousand Suns can be quite incredibly strong. So I'm going to stick them up into the S tier. Now, as well as all the gubbins that I just mentioned, we'll also like to talk about the Defilers as well, because all these guys have got their own version of Defilers, with the exception of, I don't think the Fallen Angels have a Defiler of sorts, but we'll get onto those later. So yeah, if you compare the vanilla Chaos Space Marines Defiler to the Thousand Suns, the vanilla, they come out, they've got a little bit of artillery, they've got a little bit of flamer, a little bit of autocannon, close combat stuff, all round general good stuff, yeah? Whereas for the Thousand Suns, they kind of lack that artillery, but they've got double flamers, they're charging in, bash people up, breaking morale left, right, and centre. So they've got a much more specific kind of focus on what you want for them. And I think for that reason, you probably get a lot more use out of them in that regard. I mean, there's a debate to be had about that. I think that, you know, in some certain situations, you'll want the vanilla kind of Defiler on the go. But then again, if you're a Thousand Suns player and you want, say, for example, some more artillery, well, you get the Whirlwind. If you want something that's more close combat orientated, then you go for the Ferrum Infernus Dreadnought, and, you know, etc., etc. So you've got ways to cover that. But the Defiler for the Thousand Suns not only as well being quite fast and quite close combat orientated, for the morale breaking, but it's also, you know, quite substantial. Like it's not like like certain other vehicles in close combat where they kind of die very quickly. It does have some weight behind it, so very good stuff. Now for the World Eaters, which is my favourite Chaos Space Marine Legion that is dedicated to one of the 4 Chaos Gods. So again, maybe a little bit of bias here, maybe not. But, so, Tier 1, very strong, yeah? They come in, and maybe you've gone for your Cornet Raptors, they come and bash people in close combat, and you get additional economy because of their, you know, passive ability, which is quite good. It helps set them up for Tier 2, which maybe they don't have, like, the strongest Tier 2 ever. Then they get into Tier 3 and Tier 4 and stuff, to get their Sicarian tanks out. They've got their, what we call them? The Red Butchers, are they called? The Terminators, which come around and smash people in the face. So they've got a very clear kind of like path for which they should go. Which is a shame because they've got access to demons, but the demons are so bloody expensive that you can't really make much use of them. It's not like the Thousand Suns where you can just straight up open with them. I mean, you can open with the demons if you really want to, but it's just too green money intensive, I would have to say. And if you go for the, there's like a Mechanicum kind of, or Dark Mechanicum kind of path we could take, where rather than focusing on the close combat stuff, focus more on the range combat with the weapon servitors, and then later you've got your Thieves of Khorne and all that stuff. Essentially, from what I've seen and what I've gathered, the World Eaters, you either go super close combat orientated and do well, or you go super long range and do well. But then, like, if you go close range, you struggle against people that are primarily ranged, and if you go ranged, then you struggle against people that are primarily close combat. So, whichever way you go, you're going to be very strong in one direction, but very weak in the other direction, until you get obviously into that later stage of stuff, and then things go well. And the Khornate Lord as well, their heroes are a bit interesting. So, you'd expect that the Khorne Chaos Lord comes in and would be able to thrash anyone in close combat, which is not the case. We have not seen that happen very much on the channel. And then you have the other dude where he's got his Dark Apostles and stuff. He's alright, he comes down and he does his... He's more of a supporting kind of guy anyway. No problems with that. And then you've got the company commander for the Red Guard. I can't remember what they're called, but they come out. And unlike the Imperial Guard people who can have maybe 2 bodyguards in Tier 1, you can have like 6 or 7. And then as the game goes on, he's able to upgrade his bodyguard with even better people. So it's a little bit wet around the ears initially, but then it gets a lot better. So mixed results on there. So I think that bearing in mind that you've got to kind of like dedicate yourself to really focus on one thing or the other, I'm going to put them, I hate to say, I'm going to put them in C. They're fine as they are, they're okay. They're not exactly screaming out at me saying, yes, we are super duper strong. Speaking of super duper strong, Emperor's Children. And anyone who's seen the Emperor's Children videos on the channel, you'll notice that their win rate on the channel is remarkably high. If I can remember the build order really quick. So you've got your Pleasure Cults that come out, then you've got your Celestial Lord, go for a couple of Noise Marines, take up into Tier 2, Warp Talons. If you don't win with the Warp Talons, take up again, then you get your Phoenix Guard, and then your Sonic Predators and all that stuff, and then you're laughing to the bank. I've not seen many people deviate from this, how would one say, this build order. But then again, it's quite an easy build order to remember. It's also quite a natural build order as well. I think if you were playing Emperor's Children for the first time and didn't really know what build order to go for them, it's quite a natural build order. You'd figure it out on your own eventually, I think. And they've also got that ability where when they're about to die, they just say no. They pop their combat drugs and say, right, we'll die later, thank you very much, we'll be alright. So even though they're maybe not the tankiest kind of dudes and dudettes on the planet, they are able to, escape sticky situations. And they've lost a lot of their power. Well, not want to say a lot of their power. The Warp Talon stuff has been negated somewhat by reducing their damage to buildings, if I'm not mistaken. Which, help them, curtail their strength quite a lot. I think that while they seem really, really strong, I think that a lot of their stuff is relatively easy to counter. They've got quite a few weaknesses that I don't think we see a lot of players exploit in a lot of the games that we've seen on the channel. So say, for example, Warp Talons come out. They start bashing things in close combat. And, maybe the opponents go for lots of vehicles and stuff. Well, the Warp Talons can kill vehicles. Maybe they go for lots of infantry to try and kill the Warp Talons. Well, the Warp Talons can kill the infantry and those guys as well. But very rarely do people go for aircraft. Because aircraft is the only thing that the Warp Talons can't really punch. Again, like we mentioned earlier on, because they're not tall enough and they're shaking their power claws at them. And, don't get me wrong, like the Emperor's Children with their Noise Marines, they've got that ability where they're able to change their regular weapon into anti-vehicle and aircraft stuff for a short while. So that is counter. But then you could just kind of like pull back a bit, wait for that ability to go back and cool down, then come back in and finish up the Warp Talons. Or maybe you could go for weapons that do like knockback, like grenade launchers and stuff like that. maybe that is the way forward. So, well, I do think that the Emperor's Children are probably, at the moment, the strongest faction, I would say, going for the Chaos Space Marines at the moment. I think that's only because we're not really seeing that much, how would one say, not seeing really like proper counterplay against them. I think the counterplay does exist, and when people start counteracting their stuff, maybe the build order will change, maybe other things will happen. But even if you are able to counter the Warp Battalions and all that stuff, they've still got loads of other stuff that they can go for. You can bring out the Demonettes, you can bring out those evil hate angel kind of things. Later on in the game, they can get Fulgrim, they can get Grey Demon Prince of Slanesh Person. They've got their big old tanks and stuff, like their Land Raiders and whatnot. So, yeah, just all the way through, they're quite strong. So moving on to the Death Guard, these guys have been hit with a couple of nerfs in the recent update, which I think do quite drastically change their power rating. So, in the previous game, or the previous version of the game, two main points stand out for a lot of people, and that was the Plague Havocs, with their Putrid Missiles, being able to be good against infantry and vehicles at the same time, and then the Plague Zombies would come out, slap you once, you would then be poisoned until you died, and you would win basically through that. And I suppose they're kind of like the, how would one say, the Chaos Space Marine equivalent of the Imperial Fists. They stand there, they like a prolonged combat, because they've got loads of health, they've got quite decent regen, if you get the correct support units in there. The Plague Lord can throw down some green goo about the place, which heals everyone as well. So they've got some staying power. But with those two things being reduced, they don't really have as much punching power as they used to do. Now, one thing as well on top of this is that at the beginning of the game, before you even get to choose what's going on, you've got to select a Death Company, which is a big commitment for the first opening 10 seconds of a game. Because when you think about it, right, so choosing on a company for the Death Guard, it basically locks you out of certain kind of relic units, certain kind of characters that you can get later on, which is quite a unique thing for, a lot of factions, really. So say, for example, right, you've got the Emperor's Children. They come out and they can basically get everything, right? They can get the demons, they can get the big vehicles, and there's no limit to, like, what they can choose from later on in the game. So that means they've got that flexibility, depending on how the match is going. Whereas the Death Guard, they've already made that choice. They've already locked in the first opening start of the game. So they can't really, like, let's say, for example, they pick the Death Company where they've got Typhus in there, and they've got Mortarion and all that stuff, and it's great. But then maybe later on in the game they think, oh, actually, no, it would have been much better if I had more like Land Raiders and stuff. They can't go back and then change that choice. They've got to stick with it, which, it's not the end of the world for them, but it does put them at a bit of a disadvantage when compared to things like the Thousand Sons and the Emperor's Children. So I'm going to move the vanilla people this way, and I'm going to stick the Death Guard just in front of them. I think that they have quite a decent option in vehicles. Their infantry is amazing. The Noxious Plight, Plague, Blaster, whatever you call him, throwing grenades and stuff, all that good stuff, but not quite on the same standard as the Emperor's Children and the Thousand Sons. So here we have the Night Lords. Now, much like the World Eaters, these guys are my favourite Chaos Legion that aren't dedicated to a specific god. And these guys, I really like them. Really, really like them. But I think they fall into the same kind of trap as the Raven Guard do. So one of their kind of quasi-niche little gimmick things is that their units can be infiltrated, or at least some of their units can be infiltrated, when they're in heavy cover, which is great on a map that has heavy cover. Not all maps have that, and some maps don't have the heavy cover in useful places. So it's kind of a bit of a moot point there. Problem with the Night Lords is that when you're playing as them, right, you can either go Raptors, which is generally what people do. They come in, they beat people up, tier 2 weapons, you then give them some metal guns, and they can kind of run around and stuff, but in a straight-up firefight, they're not all that good, which makes sense because Night Lords, canonically, don't do straight-up firefights, like going knocking around and stabbing people in the back and all that stuff, which is great for slower, factions. Like we saw the other day, it was Night Lords versus Salamanders, and the Night Lords just slowly but surely picked them apart one by one, which was wonderful to watch. But against factions that are able to, like, meet your maneuverability and stuff, it's really, really hard to get them off the ground. And they've got quite good hero units. You know, you've got Xyla, Sharla, I mean, whatever, the dude with the knives for hands, and he's drops the meat on the floor and makes everyone whinge. You know, he's quite good. You've got the captain, which is a maneuverable tier 1 hero, goes around, and although, like, I've seen him, like, duel a couple of people, he doesn't exactly win against most people, but, you know, being properly supported by some raptors and stuff, he'll do all right. When you get into, like, late stage of the game, the vehicles aren't exactly amazing. They've got 2 choices of hell talons, like one that's anti-vehicle and building, one that's anti-vehicle and heavy infantry, which is not anti-vehicle, just anti-infantry and heavy infantry. So, you know, there's a good selection there. I haven't really seen much of their defilers, but yeah, they're just a bit thin, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. The infantry, like, say, for example, the regular Night Lord tactical marines, they've got the ability to throw down terror grenades, which is quite useful for breaking morale and stuff. Their Psyker is remarkably good. His Spite is, you know, great at dealing with large swaths of lightly armoured infantry. But they don't quite have that staying power in the late stages of the game when things are going here, there, and everywhere, and you know, maybe larger armies kind of start forming, and the side harassment is, you know, maybe waxing and waning in usefulness in a game. I don't think that they're all there just yet. So I'm going to put them just a little bit behind the World Eaters. Oh, there we go. 2 favourite factions for the Chaos Space Marines. They can sit hand in hand next to each other. And the last for the Chaos Space Marine factions are the Fallen Angels. These guys are... They're like a quasi-mix between a Chaos Space Marine faction and an Imperial Guard faction. They've got good access to heavy infantry in the form of their tactical marines. They've got heavy weapons teams and regular infantry units. They can do this really interesting thing where they can tech up without actually selecting the tech up option. They can just research it through their enclaves and stuff, if that's what they're called. So they've got some stuff on the go for them. And they're pretty standard as all things are considered, really. There's nothing about the Fallen Angels that jump out at me and say, ah, yes, this is why we're good, or this is why we're bad. It's kind of like the vanilla Space Marines in the sense that they do a little bit of everything, but I don't think that they do anything in particularly amazing, I would say. So, for that reason, I'm going to move the Night Lords a little bit over here, and I'm going to stick the Fallen Angels smack bang in the middle of these guys in the OK section. Alright, so moving on to this weird category. It's like Agents of the Imperium. I couldn't quite exactly figure out where to put these guys, so it's a bit odd only having 4 people in one, but we'll roll with it, baby. We'll roll with it. So, starting off, vanilla people, we have got the Sisters of Battle, and I'm going to stick them in a firm B. So, if it was just vanilla, they'd probably be like the Space Marines, really. They'd be in C. Mainly because they're missionaries, you know, one singular model going out to cap stuff. A little bit of a, you know, bit of a difficult thing if they're being aggressive towards you. Quite easy to snipe out individual models. But they've got the Novitiates as a capping unit as well, so that's quite good for them. The Seraphim opening is still quite strong for them. And, you know, getting into that tier 2 with the Celestians on the go, they're quite strong as just a regular standard heavy infantry unit. And, you know, they can also be upgraded with their multi-melters and melter guns, which make them remarkably good against vehicles. So they've got that flexibility to them as well. They've got the Faith abilities. So, I mean, just stick a missionary in for the Novitiates, put some laying of hands on them, and in a battle that they shouldn't normally be able to win, they are then able to squeak out a couple of victories here and there. Later on in the game, the Penitent Engine, stupidly quick walker with a remarkable amount of damage. They've got a lot of access to many different saints and all that stuff, which make them got lots of different options in the later stages of the game. And yeah, not the Commissar, the Confessor. He's got like a smite ability like no other. Throws down something, wipes out nearly everything that it touches. So just all around, nothing too wow amazing about them, but they are quite strong in the grand scheme of things. So the Adeptus Mechanicus, these are So these are a hard one, right? So a lot of times that I see them on the channel, they are played by particular people who are remarkably knowledgeable at the Adeptus Mechanicus. They know exactly how they work. They're able to make them work exactly how they fancy. I feel like as if with the Adeptus Mechanicus, a lot of the things that make them interesting are also more of a detriment rather than something that makes them special and fun and, really, really good. Like, let's say, for example, I mean, we'll bring it back to a faction like the Imperial Fist, right? So, strong, sturdy, break the morale, makes them fight more, makes them hunker down and go forward. They've got their, siege marines that carry heavy cover around with them. All the things that make them unique and interesting in comparison to other factions are usually bonuses, right? Whereas for the Adeptus Mechanicus, kind of like Space Wolves in a way, a lot of things that make them interesting make them a little bit weaker in certain regards. I mean, they've got other strengths, like, say, for example, the War of the Messiah, the Spidery person, whatever you call him, the Cataphracts robots, all that stuff. They're stronger for what they are, but because of their reliance on the Wi-Fi and stuff, it's hard to say. It's a really difficult place to put them in. But I would say that, so they've got quite a lot of flexibility with their high pacifists, able to get lots of different weapons on the go for their upgrades, so they're able to turn their attention to kind of any kind of thing going on. Being able to deep strike their Hellstalkers into places is really good for base trades and harassments and stuff like that. They're able to get the big Grey Knight Paladin out, which is a redonkulously strong Titan unit, also quite fast as well, all things considered. Their heroes are able to not only repair stuff, but also build stuff as well. So there's a flexibility in that, like if someone's capped something and you've got no build unit nearby, then they're able to do that. So they've got lots of stuff on the go for that. So I'm going to put them just behind the Sisters of Battle, I think. I'm loath to do that. I want to put them in top C. I might put them in top C. I'm going to put them in top C, I think. Yeah, I can't really justify them being higher than, say, I know we weren't going to compare these factions to people that aren't in the group, but it's a very small group, so I'm going to allow myself to do it. I'd say that, yeah, they're not really much more wowzers trousers than, say, something like the World Eaters or something like that. They're good, they're solid, they do what they do, but I don't think they're particularly remarkable at anything in particular. So the Inquisitorial Demon Hunters, they're a bit of a fun faction. They essentially work as basically like a quasi-combination of two factions. There's like a Space Marine faction and a bit of an Imperial Guard faction, a little bit. So if you imagine, you've got two paths you can take. You can either take the Grey Knight option, or you could take the Demon Hunters option. Grey Knights, they open up very, very strong heavy infantry, but also very expensive. Whereas the Demon Hunters, they open up, and they're a bit more Imperial Guardy. They've got large, low health units, can get access to a bunch of different weapons. Maybe they're not as flexible as the Imperial Guard. They can't jump inside of buildings. They can't, have as many weapons, I don't think, off the top of my head. But, they do all right. And I think the main strength of this is that if you go up against a faction that is a bit slow to start, let's say, for example, the Praetorian Guard, let's say the Blood Angels, something like that, you go to the Grey Knight opening, you've got strong infantry, maybe able to push them back a little bit, or, stuff like that, and you'll be totally fine. If you're going up against, like, the Black Templar, and they're being quite aggressive in the early game, then you can go for the Demon Hunters. But lots of squishy little infantry that if they die, there's no main problem with that. And yeah, so I think they're quite a strong faction, even though, like I said, they've got weaknesses. The Grey Knights are expensive, or the Demon Hunters don't exactly do as much as the other Imperial Guard-esque kind of things do. One thing to mention as well is that they've got quite a good access to a strong roster of commanders. I mean, you've got Kaldor Drago, who comes out, which basically slaps people around in close combat. Really difficult to take care of him. You've got the Inquisitor Lord, who has access to a bunch of different buffs that he can give other people. You have Titans. You've got the Side Titan, which is stupidly strong. He's got like lots of rocket launchers on his back, and there's lots of an AoE kind of spread sort of thing, while also being able to do like lots of individual target damage, so a very flexible Titan. So yeah, so these guys got a lot going for them. I'm going to put them in A, I think. I think because of the weaknesses mentioned, they don't quite get up to S tier, but as an all-around kind of faction, they do all right. And the Witch Hunters. Easy enough to explain these guys. They are basically a better version of the Sisters of Battle, right? Whatever the Sisters can do, these guys have got it. Not only have they got the Seraphins and this, that, and the other, maybe they don't have access to them as quickly as the Sisters, but they can have access to a Tier 1 Rhino, which is really, really good. They can go for Inquisitor Lord with a little crossbow thing and a children that she could bring down, which is, whoever thought that children were a remarkable weapon of war, but, that's... maybe they are. Who knows? I'm not being political here. Sorry, minor diatribe there. Yes, they've got access to like different branches. So say, for example, you can go for more witch huntery stuff, or you can go for more Sisters of Battle kind of stuff. And, you know what I mean? They've got really strong units on both sides of things. The Lightning Strike Fighters, remarkably good aircraft. You've got the close combat, or the angry ladies with the chain swords, the Sisters of Repentia. They could do stuff. And, you know, same kind of level of access to relic units as the Sisters of Battle. So I don't think they are as good as the Grey Knights, but they are definitely better, so I'm going to put them a little bit behind. So let's move on to the final section, which is all the Xenos here. That's a remarkably large amount of factions to go through, so we're going to have a bit of a busy board here, I think. So let's start with the OG factions and go for the Eldar. Now, my opinion here is going to be based a little bit on the vanilla side of things as well as the unification side of things. If you go into the Dawn of War Stats Replay website, you will find that the Eldar have a positive win rate against, I think, actually all of the other vanilla factions, which certainly says something about them. And I mean, let's take Eldar versus Orcs as an example, right? As the Eldar, you open up with double Dark Reapers or Guardians with plasma grenades and all that stuff. Well, basically, sort you out for all tier 1, right? You can even get your Farseer to Mind War the Big Mech, and you'll be fine. If your micro's okay, you'll be doing alright. Orcs will then naturally transition into probably some Storm Boys to take care of your Dark Reapers. Well, don't worry, you go into tier 2, and then Swooping Hawks, which then that way, oh, well, now you've got something that the Storm Boys can't keep up with. Then they say, oh, okay, well, now we'll go for War Trucks and War Tracks and stuff like that. Oh, well, Fire Dragons, that takes them on. And then etc, Amen. Basically, anything that you throw at the Eldar, they've got something to counter it. So long as you've got the stamina to maintain your micro. So I think these guys are firmly in the S tier sort of stuff. I think they are quite comfortable with that, although I don't know why you're that big. Let me take it down a size. There you go. Tau are another faction that basically have a answer for most things. So, like, what? You want to take something out in close combat? You get the Croup Carnivores. Want to take something out in ranged? Well then, you get the blooming Fire Warriors. Game goes on. You want anti-tank stuff? Well, you can go for the Broadside Battlesuits. Or, I mean, the Tau Commando with his missile launchers, they're great. The Barracudas, they've got some stuff going on. I mean, even though that the Tau vehicles are a little bit soft and, you know, they're easy to destroy, the firepower that they bring to the table more than outweighs their vulnerability and stuff. Now, I would have put these guys on the S ranking before. However, so for their opening, right? In the days of old, way back when in the past, the Tau were able to get their Croots and Tau stuff all in one building, in the Tau Barracks. But now it's separated into the Croot Shaping Center and the Tau Barracks in Tier 1. You build one or the other, and then you're able to get your Tau Commander. So that actually reduces their flexibility somewhat. So they used to be able to get their Croot Vespids, not Croot Vespids, just regular Vespids from the HQ. So that was their harassment stuff. The stealth suits would be able to maneuver around and capture stuff relatively okay, because not many factions have super duper infiltration detection straight off the bat. So they could go around and do that really annoying decapping stuff as they go about stuff. And, you know, yeah, so there was lots of flexibility there. But now you're kind of locked into, right, you can either have your regular Tau stuff or you can have your Croot stuff, unless you build both of them, which is a bit of a pain in the backside because you don't really want to be spending unnecessary amounts of money on other stuff if you're only going to really get one or two units from each of them. And I think that the Tau benefit from having a mixture of the stuff, you know, for the greater good, everyone working together. But Tier 2 is really good for them as well, because if you're able to get your stealth suit teams and able to keep them alive and stuff, that's a really quick, easy answer for any anti-vehicle stuff. You just basically, you know, increase the numbers, give them some fusion guns, throw them into some stuff, and also that helps for like base harassment as well. You jump in, kill maybe a plasma generator or two before jumping straight back out, with little to no harm done to them. And then their price battle suits as well. They're remarkably good. They've also got their other bigger exosuits, like the one with the really long legs that I like. The what's it called? The Riptide. Yeah, that's what it's called. Yeah, so they've got loads of access to really interesting, really strong units from start to finish, I would say, and able to transition from tiers 1, 2, and 3, and 4 really, really smoothly. So I'm going to stick these guys in A. I think that's where they live. So you have the Harlequins, and I'll be honest, boys and girls, I'm not entirely sure much about this faction, really, in all honesty. I don't really see them much in the replay section of my Discord, and when I look on the DAO replay website, and even if I see the Harlequins, I'll kind of avoid them, mainly because their UI is just god-awful. Is it a good thing for me to do? No, I don't think so. I think I should be a grown-up and ignore it, and just say, you know what, this is just a design choice, and I should just live with it. But no, I'm not going to, because it just hurts my eyes, and it just bothers me greatly. I'm sure that they are a lovely faction, and I'm sure that they do loads of things. And I mean, from what I've seen as well, you know, you've got the Harlequins that jump around and punch people, and with their Harlequin's kiss or whatever, able to turn people to bloody mints really quickly. You've got is it the Master Harlequin or the Chief Harlequin or whatever, who can pop down some webway gates and stuff. It's really good for maneuverability. But I've not really ever seen them much in any kind of situation, apart from maybe a couple of team games here and there, or maybe in a Curcast with Laughing Max. So I can't really give you much of an opinion on these guys, in all honesty. So I'm going to basically just leave them out, which is not great. It's not great, but I would rather be honest with you and not pretend that I know stuff that I don't know, but I just don't know enough about these guys to really warrant giving you an opinion on them. Right then, so we've got the Ynnari next. Now, I think that these guys suffer from a lot of things that the, more rounded factions have. So essentially, the main shtick with the Ynnari is that they're able to recruit things from the Harlequins, the, Eldari, shall we call them, and then the Drukhari, right? So they've got a huge selection of flexibility in there. But because they don't have access to all of one faction, or should I say all of one faction's roster, they kind of have like some of the good bits, some of the maybe middle kind of bits, but I don't think they have access to anything truly spectacular in their roster. I mean, the only things I can think of really is the Death Jesters and the Soul Walker kind of people, who both come from the Harlequin kind of stuff, and maybe the Dark Eldar warriors in the early game for the Shredder rifles. Yvraine, she's really good. She's able to come out, throw down that super duper mind wall, which slows people down and also does a big chunk of health damage. And they're also able to catch up in tech if they lose loads of models, because Dead Eldar is a good Eldar sometimes from their perspective. I don't think I've ever seen them make use of their Crone Sword shard location stuff, so I can't really comment much on that. So yeah, so again, they do a bit of everything. I don't think they do anything in particularly all that well, so they are going to live there. So the Farsight Enclave, they are an interesting bunch in the sense that, if you've seen the videos prior to this, they basically rely on their commanders, both for their economy and also for their recruitment, which is putting a lot of eggs in one basket. If you're able to micro the commanders very well, then you're laughing, you'll be able to get loads of money incoming, and you'll be able to just throw units out the wazoo. In the early game, they'll struggle, obviously, with recruitment, but then again, those Guevasses are pretty good as a standard unit. It might seem like the commanders are really strong for them, but every time I've seen them go up solo against people or try and do things on their own, even if they don't die, they'll be brought down to quite low health very quickly, and then essentially they've just got to basically babysit the base, because if they stretch out and then get sniped out or killed or whatever, then that's a huge blow to the Farsight Enclave. So they've got lots of potential, and as the game goes on, basically even then as the game goes on, so most of their power comes from their commanders, which makes sense. That's the whole niche of their faction. But bringing out those big heavy guns and bringing out the game-changing kind of units, it's quite hard for them. It's quite hard for them indeed. It takes a lot of time to vamp them up. And it's so easy to kind of get in their way. If you're going up against an opponent that's very much focusing on taking out all your boys, then it's going to be very hard to get them on a rolling path. So I'm going to put them... Do I put them on the same level? I'm going to put them just behind the Tau, I think. I'm going to put them just regularly here, I reckon. I do want to put them in A, in all honesty, because I think that once people get more use of them, and once we discover more strategies with them and learn more about them, I think there will be a proper A, maybe even S tier. But at this stage of the game, at this stage of everyone discovering them, I think I'm going to put them at B, just to be safe for now. And now for the Orcs. Definitely one of my favourite factions in Dawn of War. Dare I say, in the 40k setting, like everyone said a million times over, they're probably the only people in the Warhammer universe that are just having a grand old time, aren't they? So I'm going to put them in the S tier. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I don't think that they are necessarily super duper strong, and that's why they're in the S tier. I think it's because they've got a very simple way of doing the tier 1s and 2s, and then the tiers 3s and 4s are remarkably diverse. So let's say you're in tier 1. You go big mech, you go some shooters, you go some sluggers. Simple as that. Put some big shooters on them. Maybe you go Storm Boys if there's some ranged people that, bobbing and weaving, maybe the maneuverability is a bit peculiar. That big mech, teleport around. Later on, you could throw down some big zappy things on whatever, and it's all sorted, right? Orcs, super duper simple. You can teach your grandma how to play them in tier 1, and even your grandma will probably do really, really well with them. When they get into the later stages of the game, they have got squig-offs, they have got stompers, they've got the Death Dreads, Killer Cans, War Trucks, Flash Kits. They have got so much diversity in their ranks as the game goes on, which then I think that really helps as well, because one thing that a lot of players struggle with in a game, especially in a RTS PvP style of thing, is that when they go into a game, they don't really know exactly what they're doing. You want to have a build order in mind and then expand upon that later on as you go through the game. As for the Orcs, you only really have one build order. It is just Boys Hut, Plasma Generator, maybe a cheeky War Banner early if you're going for something very specific, but 9 times out of 10, you don't. You just go Shooter Boy Squad, 2 Sluggers for capping, Big Mech, have fun, and away with the fairies you go. And because they're quite cheap units, if you get a squad wipe, it's okay. There's just more boys you can get later on. So I think that's good. And then the access to Titans later on. You can also get unlimited Slugger Boys, which I think we did a while ago. There was a Steel Legion game versus Orc game. It was a 3 versus 3. And when all the economy was down, maybe all the strategic points were decayed away, us as the Orcs, we thought, right, okay, well, we'll just summon a million Sluggers and just eventually win just by sheer weight of numbers. So that's always an option for you. So you've got so many different options when it comes to the Orcs. Now, the Necrons are a weird one. I think that in the right hands, the Necrons are ridiculously strong, right? You've got your Necron Lord that teleports around everywhere. You can throw down solar pulses or the patented John Cena beam, as we all come to know and love that ability. Phase shifting, all that stuff is just like a commander that can do everything, and he's just a remarkable individual. And then as the game goes on, if you want to stick him into an ancient pyramid and then turn him into something uber strong, I mean, okay, you lose that flexibility for him, but each individual Necron Lord has got a very specific thing that they do. And if you need that in the late game, that's pretty good. Comparing them to their vanilla counterparts, or should I say the vanilla version of the Necrons. One problem that the Necrons had in vanilla was that their access to vehicles was a little bit shite, really. You had Destroyers, Tomb Spiders, Heavy Destroyers, and that's about it. Because with these guys, you've got, the Flying Croissants, you have got the Ghost Arcs, you've got loads of other stuff on the go for them. So they've got that bit covered. Lovely access to vehicles later on. In Tier 2, and especially Tier 2.5 is when they really, really pop off. They've got the Sekortek Destroyers, the Crab People with the blades for hands. They're really, really good. The Immortals do redonkulous damage against vehicles. The Flayed ones, they're Tier 1.5, but they come in and do stuff. The only problem with them is that in the early stages of the game, you've got to be so careful with them. If you are going up and someone's rushing you, and maybe you haven't built a Ghost turret, or maybe you don't have any Necron Warriors, you're shut down quite easily. If the Necron Lord is out and about doing his thing and then dies in a weird kind of position, or maybe it's too early in the game and it's too expensive to really get him back, you're kind of shut out of things. Necron Warriors, before the summoning call comes out, if they push out too far and then they get killed, then they can't exactly run away and stuff. So there's a lot of potholes for the Necrons in the early stages of the game, but as the game goes on, they kind of steamroll out of control, really. Which makes sense, that they're the slow, lumbering things waking up from the tomb worlds and stuff, so canonically that makes total and absolute sense. I'm going to put them ahead of the Tout. That's what I'm going to do. They're going to live right there, as I think that they are not as strong as the Eldar and the Orcs. I think the Orcs and Eldar have got lots of things that they could do to shut down the Necrons in lots of ways. But if the Necrons are able to weather that storm, then they'll do remarkably well, I would say. Okay, the last of the vanilla factions, we've got the Dark Eldar. The Dark Eldar, I don't hold much love for the Dark Eldar, but mainly because they have like a faction playstyle kind of thing going on. Doesn't really do it for me. They are strong tier 1, kind of fall off in tier 2, and then tier 3 come back like all guns blazing. So if you do enough damage in tier 1, kind of cruise through tier 2, smack around in tier 3, you're having a grand old time. And I don't... I actually don't know if I agree with that, what I've just said. Their tier 2 actually does have some options in there. So, I mean, what you've got your Scourges that come along, and they destroy things with the Dark Lances. The Raiders, they're not that great. Or the Ravagers, or whatever you call those tier 2 transport vehicles. But they do have those Venoms, which are, kind of like an Eldar Viper, but bigger and stronger, I guess. So actually, no, maybe that tier 2 isn't as naff as I keep on saying every time I talk about the Dark Eldar. So they could transition from tier to tier fairly good. Their heroes are quite decent. You've got the Archon that comes out with his little incubi friends, and they could generally 1 versus 1 a lot of other commanders and stuff. Can also leech life and stun people. Also that Malictus Valedictum, whatever you call that turns people against each other. So can also really, really damage a opponent in the late game by just basically ignoring one chunk of his army, making a fight amongst each other for a little while. So that's not terrible. I suppose in the late game, maybe this is the crux for them, is that the big bad units, you have got the witches, the what they're called, the fell beast, the little red doggers. They've got the big red dogger, and then you've got the Vrax, and then you've got the what are they called? The homunculi? The homunculi is the command of the crab hand. The grotesques, that's what they're called. All the big, heavy hitting infantry units, very close combat orientated. And when you get to that late stage of the game, a lot of factions will have ways to, avoid that kind of close combat stuff. Which, I mean, if you've got the witches and they pop their drugs and then make everyone speed up and then everyone just rushes down towards your stuff, they can kill things quite quickly. And they've also got access to the Soulstorm with their soul collecting abilities and stuff. And one thing to mention as well is that a lot of their Titans are flying Titans, which, as we mentioned earlier on, are quite good. A lot of Titan units, or should I say, a lot of relic units, very slow and cumbersome, but the ability to move lots of firepower very quickly across the map is very, very useful indeed. So I think I'm going to put them... I'm going to put them a little bit behind the Tau. To be honest, I think they're more or less on the same level as Tau, I would say. If I saw Tau versus Dark Eldar, I suppose, actually, no, maybe, because maybe I'm thinking too vanilla here. I'm thinking that, again, because Tau now have got to build that Kroot Shaping Center, all the Tau barracks, to get one or the other. I think that, because if a lot of Mandrakes come over, and you've got your Tau Fire Warriors, that's a bit of a problem, but the Kroot would be able to help you sort them out. Whereas, you won't be able to get them unless you build both buildings. So actually, I think the Tau have looked out on this one for that particular reason. I might be wrong on that. Yeah, Chaos Demons, they're not Xenos. I know they're not Xenos. Leave me alone. But they're not Chaos Space Marines neither. And I didn't want to do with these guys on a page on their own. So they're here. They're here because there's nowhere else that'll take them, I suppose. And Chaos Demons, they are stupidly flexible. They have got all the 4 Chaos Gods. They've got the close combat orientated Khorne. They've got the Pink Horrors for the Zinch people. Fast Attack for Slaanesh. And the slow, durable stuff for Nurgle. Which, makes them really good. Again, makes them really good against a lot of things, but they don't excel in any one thing in particular. And, they've got the Greater Demons, which are really good later on. And they've got the Demon Armor, which makes them resistant to a lot of things on the go for them. The morale problem is an issue, because when the morale breaks, then they become, prone to dying a lot quickly. But yeah, because they, again, with the Ynnari, the Vanilla Space Marines, because they do so much, I don't think they really excel in anything else. I think the only thing that really puts the Chaos Demons head and shoulders above a lot of other factions is their Khorne path. So you get the Bloodthirst as they come out, and as they bash things, they then are able to recover health, which is quite difficult for a lot of factions to deal with. I don't think they regain health from bashing buildings and stuff. but they're able to just basically stay in the fight for as long as humanly possible. You back them up with some pink horrors or any form of like range kind of thing on the go, and you're basically laughing with them. But other than that, I don't think that they are a particularly wowzers trousers kind of faction, unless of course you get their big end game units out, which is a thing that they can do. So I was going to put them on the top of C, but I'm actually going to put them on the bottom of B, I think. Mainly because, like I say, even though they are good against everything and they suffer from that jack of all trades, master of none, that corn path does really seal the deal for me. I had to put them in B. And then the final faction that we're going to put in a tier list today is the Tyranids. And these guys are just, we've seen them so many times on the channel, absolutely rip through people. They are able to turn their units to, you can get the little ones out, you can swarm over people, and it'd be remarkably cheap, so they can tech up quite quickly. They've got the Raveners for early game harassment. You've got the Warriors that can stand firm and do some lots of damage. The Carnifexes and Screamer Killers have all got demon armor, so it's really hard to take them down. They've got the Zone Throps, which do a lot of damage. All the way through every single tier, there's something that they can do which makes them really, really strong. And their relic units as well. I mean, you get the Capillary Towers. They've also got that ability where they're able to use random abilities like mind control over things. They can literally mind control a relic unit, which is quite strong. I don't know if that's been patched out, so don't quote me on that. But still, able to take over an enemy unit for a little while is really strong. And they're also able to just summon like random units as they go forth as well. Of course, but it's not a terrible thing. So you know what? I'm going to move the Orcs a little bit back, as much as it pains me to say it, and I'm going to stick the Tyranids right on there. So that is all the factions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take all the factions. I was going to do S and A, but we've actually got a fair few factions in S. So what I'm going to do is that rather than do S and A, I'm just going to take the S ones, mainly because I've been recording this for about 2 or 3 hours now, and I'm getting tired, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so here we are with all the S tier factions. So what I will do is I will start from the weakest and go over to the strongest. And I think that'll make a lot more sense. So looking at all these guys, and let's also compare, let's pretend that all these guys are having a big, massive battle royale and seeing, rather than comparing them to the other factions that haven't quite made it, just for my own mental well-being, let's compare them to each other on this little line here. I think the weakest S tier faction is probably going to be the Orcs. Now, what I mentioned earlier about them having a really basic opening strategy, they go shooter boys, they go big mech, they go sluggers, maybe storm boys, do whatever. Because that is their standard way of playing, you know what they're going to go for. If you're going up against the Orcs, you know automatically exactly what they're going to do. They're going to do the same brain-dead thing all Orcs do. They're going to smash things, and crash things, and bash things until they get their bigger toys, and then you don't know what they're going to do. But up until then, you have a rough idea of what exactly they're going to be capable of, which is not the same for all these guys here, I don't think. And then following them, I think I'm going to go for the Tyranids. So we mentioned earlier on that for every single stage of the game that they've got something on the go for them. So they get their little uns from the Gornsai Broodhive, they get their big uns from the Tyrannicus Broodhive, and so whichever one they go for first, that's what they're going to go for essentially. And you don't really ever see a player go for a Tyrannicus Broodhive and a Gornsai Broodhive, mainly because they want to get into tier 2 as quickly as possible so they can then get all their other gubbins and stuff on the go. So if you are playing against a Tyranid player and you see big uns, you think, right, okay, now I know what they're going to go for. If you see little uns, like, right, okay, now you know what they're going to go for. So you can plan accordingly based on first point of contact, which isn't as predictable as the Orcs, but it's still a little bit predictable. And as the game goes on, let's say, for example, they go for a lot of close combat stuff. Oh, well, you go for aircraft. And if they go for, like, the zone throps and stuff, well, jump troops will sort them out. So even though they've got a lot of stuff going for them, once you know what they're doing, you are then able to get on top of them. The main thing is being able to make sure that they don't expand too much in the base. If they're getting too many reclamation pools, then you're knackered, essentially. So you need to be able to keep them down. But if you are able to keep them down, then that is a good thing going for you. Okay, so the third weakest S tier faction, it's really hard at this point because they're all remarkably good in their own right. But when comparing them to all of each and every one of them, I think it's going to be the Imperial Fists. Right, so let's say, for example, the Imperial Fists are against the Eldar. Let's say, for example. Generally, Imperial Fists, they go for heavy infantry, they go for big tanks, and they slowly but surely grind down their opponents and win, right? The Eldar basically look at them and say, right, your unit composition is quite monotone. You've got two kind of things, heavy infantry and vehicles. Well, we've got the units to be able to deal with that, so we don't actually need to get that many kind of stuff. We could just go, we could go, oh, well, we'll get for a bunch of Dark Reapers or later on Warp Spiders, and then either Swooping Hawks or Fire Dragons, and then that'll sort you out, right? Whereas, okay, maybe in later game stages, you've got Rogel Dawn, and you've got those dudes with the hammers and the Terminators coming in. A little bit of a different story, but generally that's how that would pan out. Maybe you're going up against the Thousand Sons, and it's like, right, okay, well, you know what, we might be able to take on their actual infantry, but the Screamers or stuff like that, well, they could just go around us, so we might be focusing on them, but they'll be able to get to our base a lot quicker, and they'll be able to shut us down, so we then can't really push out very far without having to defend our hearth and home. Especially because if that siege generator falls, then the green money economy just goes from whatever number it was to absolute zero. It takes them a long time to recover. I suppose that's another thing as well. Like, if you get loads of generator bashing done in most of these other factions here, then they could build up like 4 plasma generators in quick succession. Whereas for the Imperial Fists, they lose that, then they've got to rebuild it, and they've got to you're just basically building it one at a time, which is not ideal for them. It's not like we're able to put like a couple of builders on one thing to build it quicker. You can't exactly speed up the research at all. So I'm thinking that's another thing. Or like, let's say, for example, you're going up against the Renegade Guard, Imperial Guard, or Death Korps Krieg. So, okay, well, we can kill loads of them, but then they can reinforce themselves a lot quicker. And even though that we've got quite strong tanks, those Guard factions have got infinitely better tanks. And even if we get our Glaive out and other stuff like that, well, they've got Beyblades and they've got stuff like that. So I don't think, pound for pound, the Imperial Fists will go toe-to-toe with these guys, as well as they could against, say, for example, the Tyranids and the Orcs. That being said, I think that the Eldar are probably next on the list. So, we mentioned before, they've got an answer for absolutely everything, and if the micro is on point, they'll be able to shut down basically whatever someone's able to throw at them. Now, one problem with the regular Eldar, is one of their weaknesses, I would say, is probably burst damage. So they go in somewhere, and they take a whole bunch of damage, so even if they do fleet of foot away, that's going to be a problem for them. And say, for example, the Thousand Sons, well, you've got the Sorcerer Lord, he's able to throw down Doom Bolt, which does a bunch of damage, can even chain them to the ground, and then stops them from running away. So any kind of crowd control kind of thing is going to be a real big problem for them. Anything that reduces their maneuverability. And also, on top of that, in the early game specifically, their ability to kind of like harass bases and stuff isn't ideal. I mean, the Dark Reapers can come in, they can shoot down plasma generators, they can shoot down things like that. So in that regard, against Thousand Sons and Emperor's Children, they should be doing all right. Against the Imperial Guard factions, they'll really, really struggle. They go inside the base, and the Imperial Guard say, oh, look, Dark Reapers here. Why don't we just jump behind this wall? Because their guns don't do good against walls and stuff. So, yeah, I think that for that reason, probably the Eldar won't stand up too well against these guys. Even though, like I say, they will be able to do a fairly good job if they're able to avoid that burst damage, which the Imperial Guard do kind of lack, I suppose. They don't really have anything that comes and just basically does a whole chunk of damage straight away. Apart from maybe their Basilisks, but that'll be a little bit later on in the game. Maybe their Bane Blades, but by then, the Eldar will be zipping and zapping all over the place and stuff. But yeah, the lack of crowd control, or should I say the weakness to crowd control, is probably their main problem there. So the next one's really hard. I'm either thinking Thousand Sons or I'm thinking Death Korps Krieg. So let's say, for example, the Death Korps Krieg, really, really strong defensive capacity. They can put down turrets, they can put down bunkers, their infantry isn't too shabby, the tanks are quite good. But I don't think their tanks are as good as the Renegade Guard, Imperial Guard. I don't think that their aircraft necessarily... Yeah, okay, the heavy Vindicators and all that stuff, they're quite good. But, on their own in a vacuum, while they might be able to do some stuff, if you're up against the opponent that knows what they're doing, they'll be able to take them out. If they've got good unit composition, No one singular unit is going to win you a game. And while the Death Korps Krieg are being defensive and this, that, and the other, they are then giving up map control elsewhere. Now, if they're being super duper cautious, they should be alright, but in being cautious, they are also giving up resources. Every time you upgrade a listing post or build up a bunker or stuff like that, that is money that you could be spending on taking up into tier 2, tier 3, etc., getting those upgrades in. And even with heavily upgraded infantry and tanks and stuff, I still don't think that it really holds a candle to the infantry and tanks of these other factions, especially with the concept that if the Death Korps Krieg lose their morale, then basically stand there, charge into melee combat, which, if they didn't have that, that might, swing it one way or the other. Whereas compared to like the Thousand Suns, like if they come out and they go for the Rubik Marine opening, and sorry, hold on. There's a moth somewhere. Be gone, moth! I'm trying to do a video. Should really cut this out, but there we go. No, it's still here. Ah! Bloody hell. Well, clearly, the nature is disagreeing with my choices here, but I should cut that out, but I'm not going to. So yeah, the Thousand Suns. So if they open up with demons, they are fast and nimble, but they're a little bit soft. If they open up with Rubik Marines, they are strong and sturdy, especially if they're aspiring sorcerers, but then they are also quite slow. And you can go for both, but then that will set you back on tier 2 a lot later. The Sorcerer Lord, however, though, is it's just a game changer, really. I forgot you. No, I haven't. Sorry about that. Turns out there were 2 moths. But oh dear, oh dear. No wonder why all my socks have holes in them. It's just the moths coming around and eating everything. What on earth was I saying? Yeah, okay, so the Rubik Marines, or the Thousand Suns, whatever. Sorcerer Lord comes out, he does some stuff, he slaps around, he's a real game changer. And because he's able to go for any kind of spell, he's got 3 different spell books that he can go for, which will be ideal against any kind of these factions that are left on the table. So I think that's what clitches it, is the Sorcerer Lord. I think. So I'm going to move the Death Guard, or Death Korps, sorry, that's how I see there, and the Thousand Suns there. So I've got the top 3. The Renegade Guard, Imperial Guard, and Emperor's Children. Which is a big question here. So I think for the simple fact that the Vraxian Renegade Guard basically do everything that the Imperial Guard do, but just a smidgen better. I think that's the reason why the Imperial Guard are going to go third on this list. It's really a battle between the Renegade Guard versus the Emperor's Children. But for that reason alone, I'm just going to pop you there. Which pains me to say, because I do really like the Imperial Guard. Rubbish at playing at them. Can't play them for the life of me. But, it's just the Renegade Guard, I've got it down to a T. And that's not even talking about the Shogunate. It's not even talking about Shogunate at all. Oh, that's second moth. Hold on. He escaped, but he'll be back. We're back, I know it. I'm going to quickly finish this video before the moths rally and bring forth a swarm. Okay, so, Renegade Guard, Emperor's Children. I don't want to say Emperor's Children. I don't want to, because they were the top tier last video, and I was hoping that would change. But they are still so strong, man. Even though those Hell Talons, or so the Warp Talons, don't even come in and do much building damage anymore, which is great, because, the Vraxian Guard just come along and it's like, right, okay, well, here's our structures and our defensive things, and we'll be A-okay. But as the game goes on, let's say, for example, we've got a really grinding game. Early game, I don't think either of these people have, or either of these factions have an advantage over each other. I don't think in tier 2 or necessarily tier 3 they've got an advantage. But then when we get to that tier 4 and the Emperor's Children have got all this different choice of all the different kind of stuff that they can do. Like I said, they've got Fulgrim that they're able to get out. They're able to bring out some big old Titans. They're able to bring out, Land Raiders and stuff. Whereas, the Vaccine Guard have still got quite a good selection of relic units themselves. But I think in the late game, if it really came down to it, the Emperor's Children would just narrowly be able to squeak out a victory against an equally as competent Vaccine Guard player. So that is where I'm going to put them. I'm going to put them in the number 1 slot. So there you have it, the most comprehensive tier list guide I could possibly do in the space of however long it's taken to record this bloody video. Again, I would like to reiterate that all these opinions that I've spouted off is based from all the casting I've done, and my opinions will probably differ quite wildly from the actual players of the... Oh! Aha! I got you! Take that! Caught in the palm of my hand. I'm like Mr. Miyagi, but without the chopsticks. But that's fine. Death and ruin to all moths. I don't know how to finish this video other than by saying that just, you know, all the things I mentioned before about the Age of Miniatures website, the Patreon, the Instagram, the books and stuff. That's the way to support the channel and all that stuff. And if you like Dawn of War, subscribe. And if you don't, then don't. You're an adult. You can do what you want with your life. I'm not your mother. So, yeah, thanks for coming, and I'll see you in a bit. Peace.